Welcome to the November edition of Bridge to India's monthly update on renewable tenders and policies. We start with tenders. Total utility scale tender issuance in November came in at 1,608 megawatt, up 17% in comparison to October. Auctions were completed for only one project development tender with a capacity of 300 megawatt. There were six new utility-scale tenders, five in project development mode aggregating to 1,606 megawatt and a 2 megawatt tender in EPC mode. Three EPC sub-tenders with a total capacity of 2,800 megawatt were also issued in this month, while results were announced for only one project development tender. Two rooftop tenders were issued with a total capacity of 33 megawatt. Bid submission deadlines were extended for 21 tenders, leading to slow tendering activity in the last few months. Excluding agricultural feeder and KUSUM scheme-related tenders, bid submissions are pending for around 14 gigawatt of capacity. Now let us look at details of select project development tenders issued in this month. SECI issued a 1200 megawatt hour pan-India solar wind storage hybrid tender. Rated power capacity of any one source, wind or solar, should be at least 33% of contracted capacity. Each megawatt of contracted capacity must supply a minimum 2 megawatt hour power over 2 to 4 peak hours daily. The peak hours will be specified by the buyer, but interestingly, there is no mandatory peak power offtake requirement. Monthly generation shortfall during peak hours will be penalized at twice the PPA tariff and annual generation shortfall during off-peak hours at half the PPA tariff. Commissioning timeline is set at 24 months. Bidders are required to quote a single tariff, unlike previous peak power tenders where off-peak generation tariffs were fixed and auctions were conducted for peak power tariffs. The new model offers more procurement flexibility to DISCOMs, but it's likely to come at a cost. Lack of offtake certainty and high penalties make it a difficult proposition for project developers. MECDCL has issued yet another solar tender under the agricultural feeder scheme. Bid size can range between 2 to 230 megawatt. Individual project sizes are between 0.5 to 2 megawatt. Ceiling tariff is set at Rs 3.3 per kilowatt hour under this tender. Maharashtra has issued 14 agricultural feeder tenders so far with a total capacity of 11 gigawatt, of which only 1.4 gigawatt of capacity has been allocated. Low ceiling tariffs for these tenders at Rs 3.05 to 3.30 per kilowatt hour are unattractive due to distributed nature of projects. Assam Power Distribution Company has issued a 100 megawatt floating solar tender covering multiple sites and another 50 megawatt solar tender in the state. Bid submission date for both tenders is 5th January. Now let us look at new EPC tenders. NTPC has issued a BOS only sub-tender for 1200 megawatt solar project in Gujarat. Bid size can vary from 300 to 1200 megawatt of capacity. Last date to submit bids is 21st December. NTPC has also issued a wind BOS sub-tender with a capacity of 1000 megawatt in Karnataka. Bid submission date is 9th December. The company has issued 9 EPC sub-tenders so far this year with a total capacity of 6 gigawatt and it has allocated 2.8 gigawatt so far. We move on to key rooftop solar tenders issued in November. Haryana has issued a 30 megawatt project development tender to set up rooftop solar systems at various government buildings across the state. Commissioning timeline is specified at 3 months. Last date to submit bids is 16 December. Eastern Railways have issued a tender to develop grid-connected rooftop solar systems with a total capacity of 3 megawatt in Bihar in project development mode. Commissioning timeline is 8 months. This is the second rooftop solar tender issued by Eastern Railways after the 2 megawatt one issued in May in West Bengal. Results were announced for one project development tender. RUMS Madhya Pradesh completed auctions for Tranche 2 of its 300 megawatt floating solar tender to be set up on the Omkareshwar Reservoir. Winners were NTPC, Hinduja, and SJVN, and winning tariffs range between 3.69 and 3.7 per unit. Interestingly, winning tariffs for 300 megawatt floating solar plant under Tranche 1 announced in May 2022 were much lower at 3.2 to 3.26 rupees per unit. Madhya Pradesh has been an exemplary state in the renewable sector. The state prefers to procure power on its own instead of relying on central agencies like SECI. The procurement design is well structured and received well by the industry. It has conducted auctions for 1,350 megawatt of capacity in 2022 alone, and it has tied up 11 gigawatt of renewable capacity in total so far, out of which 5.4 gigawatt is solar, 5.2 gigawatt wind, and zero point 0.7 gigawatt hybrid. 50% of all renewable power is procured at tariffs less than rupees 3 per unit, while 22% costs above rupees 5 per unit. The state fell short of meeting its RPO targets in 2021 by 3.65%, equivalent to around 700 megawatt of RE capacity. Tender issuance is expected to continue to stay subdued in the next month, but likely to pick up momentum in early 2023. This concludes our tender updates for November 2022.
Let's discuss major policy and regulatory updates for the month of November. There were many consequential policy issuances this month. On the central government front, there were follow-ups to previously issued policies. Issuance of draft operating procedure for green open access is a case in point. On the state front, Uttar Pradesh issued a landmark policy on green hydrogen. We will start with central government updates. POSOCO issues draft procedure for grant of open access through Green Energy Open Access Portal. For medium-term and long-term open access transactions at interstate and intrastate levels, CTU and STUs have been appointed as nodal agencies respectively, while RLDCs and SLDCs have been appointed as nodal agencies for interstate and intrastate short-term open access respectively. All project developers and consumers, except for those already registered with National Open Access Registry, shall be required to register with Green Open Access Portal. Application processing timeline shall be up to 3 working days for existing entities and up to 7 working days for new entities. It is worth noting that the Green Open Access Portal has already received 2,300 applications since its launch on November 11. The revised procedure, together with Green Open Access Portal, is expected to improve transparency and streamline open access approval process, which has been historically plagued with opacity. POSOCO issues draft procedure for allocation of transmission corridor for short, medium, and long-term transactions. For scheduling transactions through general network access, details of PPAs and injection points shall be submitted at least 3 days prior to delivery. A separate time block-wise requisition schedule shall be furnished 1 day prior to delivery. Balance margin after allocation to GNA and temporary GNA grantees shall be allocated for day-ahead transactions on the exchange. CNI market is expected to get an impetus from this as consumers will be able to utilize allocated transmission capacity across multiple procurement routes like long-term PPAs and green power exchange. SECI invites bid under Tranche 2 of Module PLI scheme. Eligibility and bank guarantee requirements shall vary depending on extent or backward integration. Bid size shall be in range of 4 to 10 gigawatt for polysilicon to module manufacturing, 3 to 6 gigawatt for wafer to module manufacturing, and 2 to 6 gigawatt for cell to module manufacturing. Bidders must have a net worth of 1.8 to 3.8 billion rupees per gigawatt and submit bank guarantees of 60 to 130 million rupees, both subject to extent of backward integration. Other provisions are identical to MNRE guidelines. The RFS was issued after a long delay. We expect limited interest for polysilicon to module manufacturing, but intense competition for cell to module manufacturing. Pre-bid meeting was held on 6 of December 2022, with potential bidders expressing concern over high bank guarantees and financial eligibility requirements. MNRE has issued a draft tender for seabed leasing of the coast of Tamil Nadu through competitive bidding. Lease will be granted for 35 years, inclusive of construction and decommissioning period for 4,000 megawatt of offshore wind capacity. The interesting thing is that these sites can be used for only open access or for sale on the exchange. Transmission charges shall be completely exempted, and power produced from these projects shall be eligible for REC issuance with multipliers in accordance with REC regulations. Bidders shall be required to make an earnest money deposit of 10 million rupees per project. Projects must be commissioned within 48 months of signing lease agreement. Given the high cost of offshore wind, the prospect of seabed leasing through competitive bidding is intriguing. We believe that the tender is likely to be attractive for most developers. The Department of Economic Affairs has issued a framework for issuance of sovereign green bonds. Green bonds shall be used for financing green projects, including renewable energy, energy efficiency, and clean transportation undertaken by public sector entities. Eligible projects shall first be shortlisted by the relevant government body, followed by final selection by a working committee chaired by Chief Economic Advisor with representatives from MOFCC, DEA, Niti Aayog, and implementing departments. The bonds shall be issued in compliance with ICMA Green Bond Principles, UN Sustainable Development Goals, and national policies. The bonds are expected to be attractive to international investors as redemption and interest payments will not be linked to performance of the green projects. DGTR has terminated anti-dumping investigation regarding imports of solar cells. The investigation, initiated in July 2019 into solar cell imports from China, Thailand, and Vietnam, has been terminated on 9 November 2022 following a request from Indian Solar Manufacturers Association. The termination was expected given that the BCD of 25% on solar cells has already eased price pressures on domestic manufacturing. Ministry of Power has proposed renewable generation obligation for thermal power plants. All thermal power projects commissioned after 31st March 2023 shall be required to generate or procure renewable power equivalent to 25% of thermal generation. The projects would be required to sell bundled power to the respective off-takers. NTPC and other PSUs have started investing in new thermal power projects. While renewable generation obligation would make it easier for off-takers of thermal power to meet their RPO targets, it would be easier and better to allow them to procure renewable power at competitive terms independently. MNRE has declared a bid winner for setting up manufacturing zone for renewable power equipment. Madhya Pradesh Industrial Development Corporation (MPIDC) has been declared as the bid winner. The manufacturing zone will be built by financial year 2026 with a capital outlay of 10 billion rupees, 127 million US dollars. Land availability and electricity tariff rebates in Madhya Pradesh make it an attractive place to set up a manufacturing zone. The project is expected to give an impetus to domestic manufacturing. Let's move on to the state government updates. Uttar Pradesh has issued a draft clean hydrogen policy with an emphasis on fertilizers and refineries. The policy targets 20% and 100% green hydrogen penetration by 2028 and 2030 respectively, and aims to reduce cost of green hydrogen to $1 per kg by 2030. A subsidy of up to 60% for procurement of electrolyzers with minimum capacity of 50 megawatt and a subsidy of 3,500 rupees per ton of green urea has been proposed. Moreover, a 50% waiver on wheeling and transmission charges and 100% waiver on cross-subsidy surcharge has been proposed for renewable power used in green hydrogen production. Uttar Pradesh is the first state to issue a green hydrogen policy, and that too with very generous incentives. The state has urea production and oil refining capacity of 7.5 million metric tons per annum and 8 million metric tons per annum respectively. The policy targets of achieving $1 per kg target and 100% green hydrogen penetration by financial year 2030 seem overly ambitious. Much would depend on policy implementation and funding support. Himachal Pradesh has issued RPO trajectory in line with MOP recommendations. Total RPO target has been set at 43.33% by FY 2030, split between hydro, wind, and other renewable power technologies. Obligated entities shall also be required to procure 4% of power demand from energy storage projects charged using at least 85% of power from renewable sources. Himachal Pradesh is the fifth state to adopt Ministry of Power recommended trajectory and has an estimated RPO compliance of 16.9%, mainly on account of hydro projects. Not having a solar target would play to the favor of the state as they can meet target for other renewable technologies from hydropower. The state, however, would struggle to meet wind RPO target of 6.94% by financial year 2030 as wind capacity as of November 2022 is virtually non-existent. Uttar Pradesh has issued a solar power policy with a validity of 5 years. Uttar Pradesh government has issued a draft solar power policy with a target of developing 22 gigawatt capacity by 2027, including 14 gigawatt of utility scale, 6 gigawatt of rooftop, and 2 gigawatt of distributed solar systems. A subsidy of 25 million rupees per megawatt has been introduced for projects coupled with storage in solar parks. Other provisions are identical to those in 2017 policy. These includes 50% waiver on wheeling and transmission charges, complete waiver of electricity duty for 10 years, up to 30,000 rupees subsidy on residential rooftop solar systems, and single window approval process through state nodal agency. The 22 gigawatt target is overly ambitious and unlikely to be met given the state's history. Solar Policies 2017 had a target of 10.7 gigawatt by 2022. However, installed solar capacity as of November 2022 stands at only about 3.4 gigawatt. Uttarakhand has issued draft solar power policy with validity of 5 years. The draft policy has a target of developing 2 gigawatt capacity by financial year 2027. Several incentives have been proposed, including complete waiver on wheeling charges and losses, banking charges, and SGST for residential projects, complete waiver on cross-subsidy surcharge and additional surcharge for 25 years, and wheeling and transmission charges for 5 years for CNI projects, complete waiver on electricity duty and banking charges for 10 years for utility scale projects, subject to meeting SCOD. CNI consumers with connected load greater than 100 kilowatt shall be required to meet 20% of their power demand from renewable sources, while residential consumers with a sanctioned load of greater than 5 kilowatt shall be required to meet 20% of their power demand from rooftop solar systems. Obligated entities shall retain green attributes for solar power purchase from DISCOMs. While the incentives are expected to stimulate capacity addition, the 2 gigawatt target is overly ambitious, given that installed solar capacity stands at only 214 megawatt as of November 2022. This concludes key policy and regulatory updates. We hope you found this update useful. You can view all tender policy and regulatory information on the renewable power sector in real time at India RE Navigator, a one-stop market intelligence portal for the renewable sector. You can also write to us at contact@bridge2india.com if you have a query or feedback. We would love to hear back from you. We will be back next month with another update. Until then, goodbye, take care, and a very happy new year.